Another distinctive difference between the approach that we take in ecology and bioenergetics and the approach that everyone else takes, which I term mainstream, the approach that most other therapists, psychologists use, is who do you blame for the problems? And it's not just an interesting philosophical question, it actually plays a role and makes a core difference in the results that you're going to have from the approach. So, who do you blame? Think of an example. Let's say you come to a therapist and you say, hey, I need help. I get depressed, I have anxiety attacks, I feel stuck, I need life directions. You fill in the blank there with whatever problem this may be. So you come to a therapist and you say, I need help. And the therapist looks at you and they say, yeah, there's something wrong with you. This is why you're having those problems. We need to fix a few things. You need to make a few changes. That's because you have a problem and there is something wrong with you. Think about how this makes you feel. I mean, you walked in there on your own free will. It came out of your own mouth to say, there's something wrong with me, I need help. But when that therapist looks at you and say, there is something wrong with you, everything inside of you rises in protest. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. That's because you are okay, and there is nothing wrong with you. The creator, and I just use the term creator to avoid the philosophical debate and not get sidetracked trying to argue who or what the creator is. So for our purposes, whether it's billions of years of trial and error, whether it's an intelligent creator, let's leave this out of scope because I want to focus on psychology of it. And as I mentioned all the time, the difference of bioenergetics is the focus of what is on the practical reality. So let's look at the practical reality is that the creator does not make mistakes. Everything in nature is perfect. If you look at nature, everything is in perfect balance unless and until we as humans go in there and try to mess with things. For example, we exterminate some bug that was a pest or so we thought, and then the birds that ate those bugs migrate or die, and then those birds don't pollinate the trees that they used to pollinate, then the trees die, the forest dies, everything turns into a desert over just one little change that we as humans decided to introduce. Because without our interference, everything that's been created in nature is perfect. So when God or Creator, pardon me, created this perfect baby, perfect human, he didn't make mistakes. You indeed are a perfect human being. There is nothing wrong with you. The problem here is that we as humans, unfortunately, have this capacity to exercise our free will as we do in exterminating bugs and turning forests into deserts. We also can use that will to corrupt ourselves and to add insult to injury here, we don't do it, or I said right, injury to insult, right? Replace insult with injury. That'd be a better way of putting it. We don't do it deliberately. Oftentimes, what happens is that we either get injured literally, and what I'm talking here is childhood trauma. You take that perfect baby, you somehow introduce damage to how that baby was meant to function, and then the corruption sets in. For example, if a child is neglected in their childhood, they're going to develop what we call maladaptive mechanisms that produce behaviors that are going to be self-destructive going forward, like withdrawal, anger, so on and so forth. Or we're given wrong guidance. For instance, we are told, hey, in order to succeed in society, in order to do X, Y, and Z, you need to go this path. And if anybody does carpentry, it's like if that path is just a little bit off, begin with, the more you go, the further away it gets. By the time we realize that we are miles away from where we were supposed to go, we've got the damage. So that's what happens. This is why in acmeology and bioenergetics, we don't focus on fixing you. We look at the problem that you're having as a result of what I term enemies, foreign and domestic. The domestic being the internal enemies is that trauma, those wrong influences, those misconceptions that have been put in your mind, those maladaptive mechanisms that you develop to protect yourself from getting hurt further when you were a child that don't work anymore, but you don't realize that. Those are your internal domestic enemies. Or external enemies is then when other people are trying to misguide you, misinfluence you, and you have to battle those elements. So instead of looking at you as needing help, I'd like to invite you to look at yourself as a warrior. You are a perfect human who've been put here for a unique purpose, and were created in perfection. So now what you need to do is fight the corruption, fight the wrong influences, fight the misguidance, fight your own proneness to those maladaptive mechanisms. Fight it so that you can be yourself. And when you discover and rebuild yourself as yourself, you're literally unstoppable. It's actually amazing the kind of results, and we do have lots of case studies of people trying the approach of acmeology that basically are accounts of literal miracles of people achieving enormous heights in their career, in their social life, in their financial life, in getting over psychological problems such as severe depression and anxiety, narcissism that otherwise are considered incurable, simply by discovering who they really are and putting that potential to use. And so this is the difference that I want to emphasize when it comes to the approach that we take is, who do you blame? Do you blame yourself? Do you feel there is something wrong with you? That is indeed an evil approach, because what you do is you blame the victim. Or are you a warrior who is out to conquer all the enemies, foreign and domestic, discover yourself, and put your potential to use? So, who do you blame? Do you blame yourself, or do you blame the enemies that stand in your path?